I'm the Gaming Grappler, and here's why you don't want to be the guy who fights anyone, anytime, anywhere.
Please, just send me location. Send me location.
Now listen, some of my favorite fighters in MMA history are complete dogs when they step foot in the octagon. Guys like Tony Ferguson, Donald Cerrone, Dan Hooker, and Michael Chandler have some of the most entertaining MMA fights I have ever seen, where all their fights are 5-round slugfests, where both men are trading shots blow for blow and bleeding out of every orifice. And the fights look like they're so well done, they're professionally choreographed by a professional director, but they're not. They're real, and they're happening in real life. And while from a fan perspective, these fights are incredibly entertaining, what I'm going to argue here is being that fighter isn't that good for your professional career and your long-term health and safety. The main goal of a fighter in a professional organization is to get the belt as soon as possible. Once you get that belt, you will get more money than at any other point in your professional career and all the glory that comes along with it. Fighting anyone, anytime, anywhere won't necessarily get you closer to the belt. In a matter of fact, it can be completely counterproductive. But before I break it down why you don't want to be the guy who fights anyone, anytime, anywhere, I gotta get this shameless self-promotion out of the way. Please like, comment, and subscribe to the Gaming Grappler. The more this channel grows, the more time, effort, and energy I can bring into delivering you guys content on a consistent and regular basis. And with that being said, please enjoy the rest of the video. When you think about it, becoming a fighter is one of the most insane career choices a full-time athlete could possibly make. As a fighter, your main job is to physically hurt your opponent so much that they either give up willingly or unwillingly. And as you can imagine, if you're crazy enough to fight anyone, anytime, anywhere, you are upping your odds significantly of getting a bad injury. One of the worst injuries you could sustain as a fighter, or any athlete for that matter, is a knee injury. Knee injuries can be so bad they can take over a year to recover from. And during that time off, while you're struggling to rehab your knee, your opponent isn't struggling. They're getting better, they're evolving their skills as a fighter, and they're getting more in shape. Your competition gets better while you stagnate. It's an unfortunate reality of MMA or any other sport out there, but injuries should be avoided as much as humanly possible. And before I continue, I just want to get this red elephant out of the room. The primary inspiration for this video was the career of Tony Ferguson. Tony Ferguson perfectly exemplifies that kind of guy who will fight anyone, anytime, anywhere. He's one of my favorite fighters. If I were to show anybody who wasn't familiar with MMA one of the fights from his 12-fight win streak, they would instantly become a fan on the spot. But it is a complete travesty as to what happened to his career. Tony Ferguson is a perfect example of somebody that gave so much and got so little in return, and I wouldn't wish that upon anybody. I think somebody should be completely properly compensated for the work they put in. And that never happened with Tony. He's the only fighter who had one of the greatest win streaks of all time in one of the steepest divisions of all time, and he never properly got a title shot. Tony Ferguson versus Justin Gaethje was a prime example of everything that could possibly go wrong with the mentality of fighting anyone, anytime, anywhere. Originally, Tony was supposed to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov, but unfortunately, that matchup is completely cursed and it fell apart at the last second. Tony did not take this too well. He wanted to prove that he was a professional with honor. In spite of the fact that he didn't have an opponent, he cut weight anyway, and this was a huge problem that probably put him at a severe disadvantage because 2 weeks later, he had a new opponent in front of him, and that was the top contender at the time, Justin the Highlight Gaethje. Tony should not have accepted that fight. His training camp was all about fighting one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. His game plan was probably built around denying takedowns or sneaking in submission attempts so he could keep the fight on the feet where he would have a clear advantage. Justin Gaethje's fighting style is the complete opposite of Khabib Nurmagomedov. Justin Gaethje is one of the strongest power punchers in the division and has some of the most deadly calf kicks out there. As if that wasn't enough, he has pretty solid fundamentals too and one of the strongest chins in MMA history. Needless to say, this fight was a complete train wreck for Tony Ferguson. And train wreck is the right description because this happened in an empty Apex arena where you could hear every single strike landing consecutively. And I gotta say, it sounded like Tony went through 5 consecutive car crashes in a row before Herb Dean finally said enough was enough and called the fight in favor of Justin Gaethje. Tony just wasn't the same after that fight. He never won a fight again, and he just doesn't look the same. Maybe it's his age, but I personally believe that his philosophy of fighting anyone, anytime, anywhere didn't bear him any fruit in his career. It probably robbed him of more opportunity. He got more injuries than he needed, and he got put farther and farther away from the belt by accepting last-second matchups. And listen, I'm not an expert, but Tony seems to be exhibiting early signs of CTE. He's wearing sunglasses indoors, and if you've ever had any head injuries, you know that's generally not a good sign. There's also consistent domestic reports of Tony's personal life going up and down all over the place, which is a complete tragedy. Again, I don't hate the guy, I just don't want new fighters to go down his path. This problem isn't exclusive to Tony Ferguson. A common problem among the archetype of fighters who will take on anyone, anytime, anywhere is that they will consistently accept last-second fights that rarely pan out for them. Dan Hooker has suffered from this problem a lot. He's accepted a lot of risk, but never really got to reap the rewards. Even when he wins, it usually comes with an asterisk. I'll give you an example. When Iron Michael Chandler first joined the UFC, his introductory fight was against Dan Hooker, and Dan had nothing to gain from accepting this fight. And unfortunately for him, it didn't pan out in his favor. Chandler got a knockout in the first round, and that highlight reel was used to bolster his career to the point that he got a title shot with only one victory in the UFC. Dan was not so lucky. He made the same mistake, but this time by accepting a last-second matchup against Islam Makhachev, who then proceeded to out-wrestle him and submit him in the first 30 seconds of the fight. And you know what? I don't think that this was any fault of Dan's. If he had proper time to prepare, he could have presented a better version of his skills on fight night and possibly done better than any of us would have given him credit for. Because you know what? His teammate and training partner, Alexander Volkanovski, was also written off before going into his fight with Islam Makhachev. But on fight night, Volkanovski performed so well that he cracked that invincible aura that a lot of fighters from Dagestan have. And a lot of people will even argue that he won that fight. And guess what? Dan Hooker is friends and training partners with Volkanovski. He has access to the same coaches like Craig Jones. Now, I'm not saying that with preparation, Dan would have beaten Islam Makhachev. I'm not making that argument at all, but what I will say is that he could have surprised us. He could have performed way better than any of us give him credit for, and the result of that could have given him an instant rematch even if he lost the fight, or maybe better fights leading up to a title shot. The point is, taking last-second matchups don't seem to be good for your career in the slightest. Even if he lost his fight against Islam with proper preparation, he would have come out of that loss with better grappling skills and a better game plan for his next fights. The point is, last-second matchups have not panned out well for Dan Hooker's career. The people that have beaten him have pretty much gotten near instantaneous title shots, while every time he lost those last-second matchups, he got farther and farther away from the title. The good news is that Dan seems to be having a career resurgence. He has a huge win with a W over an up-and-coming prospect, Jalen Turner, and hopefully he can continue that streak. Now, you could argue that Michael Chandler's UFC career is the complete antithesis to everything I'm saying. He also fights anyone, anytime, anywhere, but unlike Dan Hooker, his luck has been a lot more favorable. You see, he won his fight against Dan, and he instantly got a title shot. And even though his UFC record has not been that good, he's lost most of his fights, they've been so entertaining that he's been gifted one of the greatest contracts of all time. He could be debatably making more money than most champions even do. So what gives? Am I just wrong? The answer is no. While Chandler is being financially compensated and his career is going places with better and better contracts, potentially against somebody like Conor McGregor, we don't know how he's doing on the health side of things. You see, like most fighters who follow the AAA formula, Chandler takes a lot of damage in his fights, to the degree that his face is borderline unrecognizable after every fight. And sure, he still sounds articulate and he still looks like he knows what he's saying. We don't know if years from now he might start developing CTE symptoms. The fact of the matter is, you can't possibly take as much damage as he does in his fights without facing any negative consequences. It's at this point that I want to circle back to the main thesis of this video. The main goal of a fighter is to become champion. Once you become champion for the first time in your career, you'll finally get paid well and you'll get all the glory and recognition that you've been fighting for. But if you're somebody that fights anyone, anytime, anywhere, and while you might be one of the most entertaining fighters on the planet, it could set you back from reaching this goal. You'll gain injuries, and every loss you get from recklessly taking on a last-second opponent will set your career farther and farther back. You are somebody, as a fighter, who is fighting in a cage. You're doing one of the most dangerous sports of all time, and I feel that it's your main goal to get financially compensated for everything that you're fighting for. You're not fighting to entertain us. You're fighting for yourself. Never forget it.